Hey everybody, this is Brandon Ford and welcome to the Blind Rage Podcast. For this week's TV edition, we are going back to jolly old England for another installment of Hammer House of Horror. This is, I believe, episode 5, titled Growing Pains. And I don't know any of these English actors, so I couldn't tell you who's in it. But if you want to watch along, I notice that there are several episodes on YouTube, and if you want to have a lot more fun than watching them with me, you can watch them with Elvira, because the thriller video episodes are up there too. I don't know if the whole series is up there, but I know a good chunk of them are. So before we get into the episode, I want to get some plugs out of the way. First and foremost, please go to Amazon.com to check out my books in Kindle and paperback editions by typing in Brandon Ford. You can also find my author page there. If you prefer audiobooks, just go to audible.com or the Audible app, type in Brandon Ford. You'll find several of my audiobooks. If you don't already, please follow me on Instagram at writer Brandon Ford, all one word. You can also follow me on Twitter at Brandon Ford. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, critiques, suggestions, criticisms, recommendations, please feel free to email me directly at blindragepod81@gmail.com. Last but not least, please don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe if you don't already. Rating at this point, because this podcast is still in its infancy. Rating is the most important thing. It only takes a couple seconds just to choose a star rating. If you are feeling mighty generous, I'll also take a review. Just a few sentences. Let me know that you enjoy the podcast, or, if you have any ideas about how to improve it. There are a number of ways to get in contact with me. So, as jackasses who want to be your friendly boss always say, my door is always open. All right. So, I don't know why I thought that was funny, and I thought of that. I think I'm laughing because of how not funny and stupid it was, and how I'm such a fucking dork. Alright, so we're gonna get ready to start Growing Pains. I don't know why, but Growing Pains and Charlie Boy are interchangeable to me. Charlie Boy is another episode, and they have nothing to do with each other, but for some strange reason I confuse them. I guess because with Growing Pains I think of kids, and Charlie Boy sounds like the name of a little kid. I don't know. Fucking whatever. So, okay. We're going to get started in 3, 2, 1, play. So, we have to have our prologue here. With every episode of Hammer House of Horror, there's always a prologue that kind of sets up the whole story. And then we go to the opening titles. And in this prologue, we see 10-year-old William Morton killing himself. And there's an interesting line, I think, by the mother, Lori. I think she says, look at the hatred in his eyes, or on his face, or I forget the line is. But nevertheless, this is an interesting setup. A 10-year-old committing suicide. Or I don't even know if you know if it's suicide right away. But, and I guess the whole William thing is English, because if this was the US, he would be Billy. So there's going to be spoilers because I don't know how to not spoiler this. He ingested some sort of fungus, and it came. His father is see, the father being a botanist, I think, sort of overcomplicates the plot. A plot that should be very, very simple. But yeah, the father being a botanist with working on this plant that is going to solve world hunger, and he has all these people coming from this certain. Wait. Yeah, she said it. I didn't hear it, but she said, "Look at his face. It's like hatred or some shit like that." But yeah, Terrence, who plays the botanist, husband, father of William, is working on this protein-heavy plant that will solve world hunger, and he has his sights set on Africa, and he's meeting with these people from a certain organization who come to the house, and yeah, that's a subplot to what I think should be a very simple story about the ghost of a child who is haunting a family. I wasn't sure what to make of this one at first. As far as what was going to happen, I thought it was going to be very much like The Omen. I thought it was going to be one of those evil little kid stories, which were popular in the 70s. And this series was 1980. One thing that I have to say though, so William was 10 when he killed himself, and then it's supposed to be a year later, so it's present day 1980, and we cut to Lori going to an orphanage to adopt another little boy who is 10 years old. So they are literally replacing William with this new little boy, James, which is, it's kind of like a very, very twisted take on, when you have a beloved pet, a cat or a dog, and you've had this animal forever, and he or she passes away, and you're completely and totally heartbroken, and then you have people who are not exactly very sensitive and think they're being helpful by saying, why don't you just get another one? That's essentially what this is. Their child dies, so they just go get another one. And they go and adopt another one, which I think is worse than having another baby. Because they had to go through, because it's not easy to adopt an orphaned child. And they want to make sure that that you are, mentally sound to look after this child who needs a home. So yeah, they had to go through all these interviews and psychiatric evaluations, and I don't know. I think that there should have been something, but we only have like a 52 minute, I think these are all like 52 minutes, so we only have a 52-minute running time, so they don't have the time. But I think that there should have been perhaps if this was a feature, something where there is some interaction with Laurie and Terrence, the parents, with James, the new little boy, and what James is like prior to the adoption. Because when he is brought to Laurie by the matron, which is what he calls her, which I thought was odd. This is kind of a pivotal moment. I think this is supposed to represent William's ghost or spirit inhabiting James at this point, because the car goes crazy as they're driving by the cemetery where William is buried, and James looks out the window and says, "What an awful place." So that's where William is buried. But what I was going to say was, I think there should have been a scene where you saw what James was like before he was adopted and brought home, because right away, even before he gets in the car, he is a little odd. He's a little off, and he's clinging to this rabbit. Which, yeah, I think I just nailed it when I said that William's spirit inhabited James's body at this point, because James has this little stuffed bunny rabbit, this little plush doll that he takes with him and he carries with him in the car, and the matron refers to him as Bugsy. And then later Terrence asks what's his name, and James thinks for a minute and says Horace. And Laurie is struck by that immediately, because she heard the matron refer to the doll as Bugsy, and she's just like, "Why did you say that?" I heard the matron call him Bugsy or whatever, and then James says, "Well, I decided to change it," and I think that was because the spirit of William, who was inhabiting James, didn't know the name of the doll, so he just made one up. But I can't get this thought out of unusual here. I think that there should have been some interaction between the parents and James, or shown some interaction between the parents and James. According to what is said in the story, they have met on several occasions. It's just not shown. And I think one or two visits should have been shown, because it would let the viewer know that James is different after he gets in the car, and after he goes to live with the Mortons, because he's just odd right away, and you don't know that he's odd before they pass the cemetery. He's very formal, and even the matron says he's like an old man by the way he talks, because he's overly polite, and he's not like a normal 10-year-old boy, in that he's not at all precocious, or as one would expect a 10-year-old child to be, even an English one. But it's funny too, because he starts to exhibit unusual behavior right away. However, the behaviors are not so in your face However, Lori is having a nervous breakdown like right out the gate. And like especially with the scene where William says, "Where's my jackknife?" And she's like, "You didn't have a jackknife." And the matron made a list, which I thought was weird. She made a list of all of the items that James was bringing with him from the orphanage to the Morton's house. And she looks at the list and she says, "There's no jackknife on here." I guess. Well, yes. That was supposed to be. Um, William had a jackknife, and because I think the father says something to the effect of, what did he say? He says something like fucking this. I think this was here before, or I don't. He says something.
Go and sit down and talk to your father. It'll be in a minute.
But what is also strange is his resentment and his resentment toward the parents and unwillingness to call them mom or dad or mother and father. They have to do a little bit of prodding for him to be able to do that. And then even when he does, it doesn't stick. He goes from calling Lori mother to Mrs. Morton to mother. Um, but I do think that the basis for this episode is interesting because I think that we've all, during our formative years or pre-adolescence, we've all had those moments where
I distinctly remember Major referring to him as Bugsy. He's called Horace now.
I'm just talking about the name of the the rabbit. I think it's supposed to be based on
Just came into my head.
something that everybody experiences as a pre-adolescent when they have kind of a blowout with their parents, and you either don't get your way or you don't get what you want, or you feel you're being unjustly admonished for something, and you kind of have not serious but definitely adolescent suicidal ideation. And I think anybody who says they've never had suicidal ideation is a fucking liar, because everybody has at one point. But I think everybody has had that moment as a child where they think that, well, since my mom and dad were so mean to me and they don't care about me, I'll just kill myself, and then they'll feel so terrible for the way they treated me, and this will be the perfect way to get back at them. And of course, hopefully, the vast majority of the children who have these kinds of thoughts don't follow through with them, but William does. And his reasoning is he feels he's being ignored, in particular by his father, who is constantly working.
Do you mind if I didn't eat mine?
Wait a minute.
James, you said you were hungry. I am. You don't like meat, is that it? No. I just don't like these things in it.
That's horrifying. Maggots. There's maggots in, I think it's a steak. And the way it's set up,
James. Yes, Mrs. Morton.
the way it's set up, and she says, "You don't like meat?" And he says, "No, that's not it. I just don't like these things in it."
I was hungry.
And then you see the maggots.
Still hungry.
Are you not suggesting that?
I am not suggesting anything.
So she's definitely emotional, and I think that would have made more sense had it been a little closer to William's death. But it's been a year. Not that you could get over the death of a child in a year, but I think if it were a little closer to his death, her temperamental behavior would be a little more understandable.
Well, what should we call it? I don't know.
I think there's a lot of subtlety to this episode, to the story,
Well, I thought something might just come to you like it did earlier.
and
Nothing's coming to me at the moment.
I think the kid who plays James does a really good job. He kind of reminds me. I can't see him. I can't see him, but he kind of reminds me, or I think the way he plays a character
I just think something
reminds me a lot of the story in
only a toy.
Dead of Night, which was later remade in Trilogy of Terror 2, Bobby, with the little boy who was abused. And, well, there's some correlations there because that little boy was abused and he drowned himself. And then his mother, who was into witchcraft, calls him back. And she thinks who has come back as her son, but he's actually a demon Bobby sent in his place because Bobby didn't like her very much. That's a good one. But yeah, this kid, even though he's the kid in the Bobby story is American, I don't know. I think there's a subtlety in the performance that is reminiscent of it. And I don't know because I did have the A&E DVD box set when it first came out of Hammer House of Horrors, and I think I only watched the episodes that I knew and was familiar with, and there were others that I tried to watch but I found them to be kind of snoozy, so I didn't finish them. This was an episode that I didn't watch, and it was an episode that I didn't know anything about, and I didn't even see any previews of, because like I said, Elvira hosted these for Thriller Video, and at the end of
There was something about that rabbit.
she gave him a new rabbit.
All right,
Wait a minute.
tell her all about you. You tell her what about me? Everything. And then you'll be in trouble. They'll take me away. Give me to somebody else. There aren't enough children to go around anymore. Mrs. Morton.
I thought he was supposed to be stable.
See right there, I don't know how I feel about that. But what he did was, I think he cut up the plush rabbit that she gave him because Bugsy / Horace was old and smelly. So she took him to be wanted to wash him, and she gave him a new one. And yeah, he fucked it up. And then she came back and had a nervous breakdown again because of what he did to the doll. And then
Very nice day today.
he got all
James, last night.
petulant,
Yes, Father?
and he's kind of one note
What happened to Harry?
throughout the episode with the exception of that moment. And I think the one note performance is really what sells it, because it makes him eerie. But when he is very surly and says, I'm going to write to the matron and tell her that you mistreated me and they'll make me go back. And that thing about there aren't enough children to go around anymore is definitely a callback to William killing himself. Because there aren't as many children anymore. There's one less. But what I was saying before was, at the end of every thriller video, Elvira would always try to get you to rent or buy the other episodes or the other thriller video VHS tapes, and she would show little clips, and I never saw a clip of this one.
Will you be busy too?
I'm afraid I will. Some very important people are coming to see me today. I've seen this before.
Hmm. Oh, he sees the knife. The father.
It isn't his.
Yeah. Yeah, he found the jackknife and he says, I've seen this before, it isn't his. Meaning James's.
Hello. That's a nice dog you got there. Is he on?
No. He belongs to Mr. and Mrs. Morton.
Oh, yes. Well, who are you then? Are you staying with them?
I'm James. I'm Mr. and Mrs. Morton's new son.
That's nice.
I wish I was English.
I didn't know they came in your size. When I had a new son, he was in nappies for 18 months.
I think it's really nice when parents adopt children
What are you doing?
which aren't babies, because whenever parents want to adopt a child, they always want,
Steering wheel
you know,
seemed to work
at most a child who's 3. And you really don't see children past that age being adopted. They always end up in foster homes, which tend to not be very healthy places.
Here, would you
And
help me with this?
What?
I think but I think
All right.
they're being Lori and Terrence, the parents, their reasoning for adopting William,
Like this.
I guess, was to
Right, no
what's the
try other
phrase? Fuck.
way. Okay, thanks.
Because they were feeling guilty, so they wanted to
What's wrong?
No, I can't see anything yet.
ease their own torment. I was going for something
When you're new
a little more eloquent, but I couldn't think of the phrase.
Laboratory.
and you can't disturb him, right?
No. He's got some important visitors.
Now look, I've got to take this car down to my garage and really strip it right down. Will you tell him that?
Can I come with you?
See, this kid is so starved for attention that he
Not allowed.
well, he has the rabbit with him at all times. He has the dog with him at all times. And he's even willing to spend the day with the mechanic at the auto shop watching the parents' car getting fixed.
Goodbye.
Because he so desperately needs a parental figure in his life, and he feels so unloved because his parents have their own things going on. And I think it's really sad too that his father, who works in a greenhouse or whatever the fuck it is right there, but he's not.
Good morning, Dr. Morton.
You know, he's right at home, but still he can't be there for his son.
Very fresh this time of the year. Yes, sweetheart. You stop some? Yes, at the Copper Kettle Cafe. The coffee arrived instant. Chew the beat.
I had to go over the synopsis, the plot summary for this, because on Wikipedia, because there were some, for the most part, I listened to it last night, and there were some, for the most part, I was able to follow it. There were a couple of things that I didn't get, but for the most part, I was able to follow it pretty well because a lot of it is dialogue driven. And yeah, so I had to go over the plot summary prior to recording this. And they have this dog named Nipper. And because his name is Nipper, I was picturing a little ankle biter or something. Like a little chow or some shit like that. Oh no, Nipper is a Rottweiler. Didn't see that one coming. But I guess they had to have a vicious sort of attack dog because of the scene that's coming up in which Nipper goes after the rabbits, which I guess they are lab rabbits because I don't know. In trying to grow this plant, which is taking Terrence so many years to try to figure out, because because it's supposed to be protein rich, and he has to figure out which proteins are poisonous and which aren't, which is kind of sad when you think about all those poor little bunny rabbits. And later he uses some of the mold or the poisonous plant to kill Nipper because he's convinced by these guys from the organization that he's trying to, I don't know, sell the plant to. See, this is what I'm talking about. It sort of complicates a very uncomplicated, a very simplified plot by giving the father a job which has so many layers. He could have just as easily been like a best-selling author or something who was always locked in his bedroom working on his latest book and having meetings with his agents or publishers or something like that. No, this guy has to be a botanist who's trying to solve world hunger. And I think that the son, William, his grave is a little too close to where they live, because while walking the dog, James finds William's grave pretty quickly and easily.
And someone ate the compound, right? Yes. And went to his grave in a horrible trance. No, he did not. Hallucinogens affect the brain through.
Oh yeah, they say that there's also parts of this plant that have hallucinogens. And they're talking about, and Terrence is getting defensive here because this guy who works for the organization, he's trying to give the plant to, or sell the plant to, or I don't know, get them to use the plant, is aware of someone eating a piece of the plant and going to his grave in a hallucinogenic haze. And Terrence gets very, very defensive because they're talking about William.
What's got into you? That's a grave you've been defiling. That's sinful.
There are far greater sins, debts that must be paid.
I don't know what he did here,
Over there.
Thank you.
but or who that was. I think it was the mechanic, but he was at the grave, and I think that's where he was. He was at a grave. I think it was Williams, But he was at the grave, and there was a scene that I think I talked over in which he says to the grave, "What do you want of me?" So James returns to his real self very, very briefly. And I guess the spirit or the ghost, well, they don't say, I think this is meant to be a ghost story. So the ghost of William is in the dog now, and that's why the dog goes after the rabbits. I don't know. It's kind of confusing and a little more convoluted than I think it should be. But he says, whoever that guy was, said to James, "You defiled that grave. That's a sin." I don't know what he did, but I can only imagine that since he had a dog near it, that the dog peed on it or something.
Sniffer with you.
Yes.
And
Oh dear. Was it Nipper? Not much of a nipper, is he?
and the guy says, it's a sin
He seems
to
such
do
a nice
that,
dog.
to defile a grave.
Well trained.
And James says there are far greater
That's
sins,
my thought.
debts that must be
Like
paid,
grave before
which
you-
is very ominous and creepy. So that kind of sets the viewer up to believe that James has been sent to right some wrongs here and to perhaps kill Terrence and Lori because they neglected William in some way. And the only thing that you really get or are given as far as the story goes and as far as how William is neglected is this very cryptic poem that he writes or that he's written and is found in a drawer with some other books by James, who is reading it like he's never read it before.
It's we who are sorry, Mrs. Morton.
And he encourages Lori to read it. So, and she seems to get it right away. I don't remember where she goes on this during this scene, but she goes somewhere where she's gone for the majority of the day, and James is left to his own devices. So this is supposed to take place over the winter holidays, which I think is convenient because they had to pick a time. They could have just said it in summer, but I don't think. I think it's kind of hard to fake summer in England. So, yeah, they had to set it in a time when the James character would be home all the time, and basically getting himself into trouble by doing these very unusual things. So that guy, the guy from the organization, he was Indian or something, or Hindu or something, and because I could tell because of his accent, but he, is a scientist as well, and he is convincing, or was trying to convince Terrence before the dog even attacked Terrence, at least from what I remember and what I can tell and what I'm picking up on here right now, that Nipper, once, because he's tasted blood, he needs to be put down, and he's saying, once an animal tastes blood, that it his craving for it never goes away, or blah blah blah. So I don't know if he actually comes right out and says that he needs to be the dog needs to be put down, but it's very much implied. And I never understood if that was meant to be true for only human blood, or if the same goes if an animal attacks another animal, like if a dog, attacks a rabbit. I thought that if there was a bloodlust, that it would be for rabbit. I don't know. I've never owned a dog, and I don't claim to be fucking that dog whisperer guy. But so yeah, Terrence put the dog down very unceremoniously. Just fed him the poison and just said, "What did he?" I think he just said, "So long, Nipper," or "Bye," or "Goodbye, Nipper." It was like a very,
Good night, Father.
it was very. He's very unsympathetic and unemotional. And it didn't really seem to pain him at all to be putting this animal down. I guess he's used to dealing with dead animals all the time, using lab rabbits.
He was such a gentle, docile animal.
Thornton took the car in this way. There's nothing wrong with the steering.
Yeah, I so saw that coming. I think that has to be the most predictable part of the whole episode. After the car gets back and Terrence tells Lori that there was nothing wrong with the steering wheel. Of course there was nothing wrong with the fucking steering wheel. Could have told you that the minute it was happening, that it was a supernatural thing.
Still in your dressing gown? I thought you'd be in bed by now. Who was William Morton? It's your name. Was he a relation? He was our son. You've been to the churchyard? This morning, with Nipper. I'm your son now. Yes, James. You are. Was William unhappy? No!
She's a fucking live wire, this lady.
James when he died. Why are you always saying people, things are unhappy? I just keep getting these thoughts in my head from somewhere. From where? I don't know where they come from. Forget these silly thoughts. Get into bed.
See, I don't know if James is wholly or entirely inhabited by William, or if he is partially James and partially William, or William only haunts him at certain times. It's a little confusing. And while all this exchange was going on, or while James gets into bed, you hear Nipper howling outside. So the dog's a ghost now. Maybe, just perhaps, the that protein-rich plant that Terrence is working on, or the mold in it, had something to do with the arrival of the ghosts because William died by eating it, and he returned as a ghost, and then Nipper ate it and then returned as a ghost. So there could be some correlation there. Maybe that this plant carries some supernatural component. I don't know, but if it does, I think that's kind of dumb.
Mum and Dad, oh how they care. They feed the world, love all who's on it. William Morton, their son and heir, is out of sight, a distant comet. You've come at last, William Morton. I knew you would.
Yeah, so he's reading that poem that that James wrote before he died, and he's saying that his parents love the world and all who's on it, which I thought was interesting. An interesting choice of words, but they had to use "on it" because it's just, they say something like the world and all who's on it except for William Morton, who is like a comet or some shit like that. That doesn't even rhyme. But anyway, they're saying that, you know, what the fuck?
Oh, William!
He's saying that he feels as though he is floating in the galaxy all alone, and all of the love that their parents have is being bestowed upon everyone on Earth except for him. I don't know. He just is feeling unloved. He's feeling ignored and unloved, and he's a fucking brat. And now there's Ghost Nipper. And by the way, FYI, just, aside, if this greenhouse or whatever it is, I don't even know. I would assume it's a greenhouse since the father's a botanist and he's growing plants and shit. Whatever it is that he works out of that is right next to the house, if it has poisonous plants and types of mold that can, or types of mold that are hallucinogens, and all the shit that can kill you, and they have a little boy, that thing should be gated and sealed up. All they really do is say that James can't go in there. And what makes a child want to do something more than anything when you tell them they can't do it?
He must have cared about you very much. Did you care about him? Did you care about William?
Of course I cared about him. He was my son.
Did Mr. Morton care about him?
James, why do you ask such questions?
Because I think William was very unhappy.
No.
It says so in the book, Mother.
She's gonna blow a gasket again. She is unfit.
Mum and Dad, oh how they cared. They feed the world, love all who's on it. But William Morton, their son and heir, is out of sight, a distant comet.
their son and deer. Is that what the fuck? William Morton, their son and deer. It was out of sight, a distant comet.
So am I. Good night.
Good night, Mother.
So I'm not sure if again, I'm not sure if William is inhabiting James all the time, or if William is inside James only part of the time, because he just called Lori mother, but prior to that he asks if his father loved William, but he calls his father Mr. Morton. I don't know, it's very confusing.
Unadulterated sustenance. Reward for the successful completion of the trial period.
All this shit about this fucking plant, it really there's Ghost Nipper again.
Yes, Sir Arthur. The trial period ends today.
All this stuff about the plant slows the story down, I think.
Satisfactory and conclusive.
I don't know. Could you imagine being in a like third world country and people were starving and you hadn't eaten anything for days, and then all of a sudden this plane flies in and it's got a big crate and you think, oh my god, it's food, we're gonna eat, and they start giving you weeds? I would have been like, listen, okay. If you think I'm gonna eat these fucking weeds,
Sounds like never.
another breakdown.
It's impossible. I buried him myself.
We buried William too. But he's here. In this house.
Alright, you're a hysterical lady.
Saw him. Terrence. He hates us.
Something the matter.
Don't come any nearer, Father.
William.
Can break a rabbit's neck. Farm work assured me.
Is it you? What do you want?
You love Whistles. You loved all your rabbits. Spent all your time in here. Feeding them, rewarding them when they put on weight. What about me? No time
So,
till we get some of your precious powder.
this is the revelation of Ghost William, and he's threatening to kill I think he's threatening to kill a rabbit. Oh.
Don't touch that.
Oh no, the plant. He's gonna get the plant. See, this is his way of getting back at his father. I think he resents his father more than his mother, because his father's priorities are that stupid fucking weed, which he thinks is going to cure the world.
Oh, William. To their graves, they went in a trance. In a trance, they went to their graves.
William.
I can't really understand what the hell he's saying because of that stupid manipulation to his voice.
Should have been your lifetime's work. Follow, follow, my peace.
I want my plant.
I want my plant. Oh my god. fucking jerk off.
Dance and dance and dance. Sounds away.
Give me my plant. Come on.
See how he cares. What he loves. Dance on your son's grave.
I can't understand what the fuck he's saying.
That plant. He said it's mine.
That was your life. But you never saw me. He's dead, Mother.
He fell into an open grave and he's dead. So they're at the cemetery near William's grave, and then William's tombstone has Terrence's name on it. This so reminds me of that episode of Seinfeld with the girl who cries at the drop of a hat. She cries at beaches. She cries when she drops a hot dog. She cries when her shoe's untied.
I'm not sure.
And then when her grandmother dies, she's totally fine. So this is like the mother. She has a breakdown for every other fucking thing.
I do know why we're here.
But her husband is just dropped dead, fallen into a hole.
Look, Mother. Lying on William's grave.
And now she's fine. She hasn't even shed a tear.
Breathe, Mother.
For all the unloved of this earth.
I never knew that a wreath, that's what a wreath was supposed to symbolize. It's supposed to be love for all the unloved? I don't know. So there was a wreath on William's grave? What kind of bullshit ending is that? That is bullshit. I'm calling bullshit. That's a very unsatisfying ending. And I'm very unsatisfied. If there was an 800 number, I would call it, because that is bullshit. And do not take that sauce to the country fair, because it is weak. Nevertheless, thanks very much for staying with me to the bitter end. That was Growing Pains. And until next time, this is Brandon Ford wishing you all unpleasant dreams.